This is What If, a podcast from the Intergenerational Foundation. Here, we ask questions to see how we can solve unfairness between generations. This time we're asking, what if we solved the housing crisis? The UK is in a housing crisis, and it's affecting young people disproportionately. IF has just released a report. It's called Locked Out, and it details how this crisis is affecting younger generations and what we can do to solve it. To understand a little more, I sat down with two very knowledgeable people, Liz Emerson, the CEO and co-founder of IF, and Paul Brocklehurst, chairman of the Land Planning and Development Federation, or the LPDF. First, I asked Liz why this is such a key issue for younger generations.
Housing is seen as the housing we think is the most visible form of intergenerational unfairness in the UK. So just give you a very quick history of housing. So total housing wealth is around 8.7 trillion. The over 65s actually own most of that housing wealth. And we've had a massive asset bubble going on, so that house prices in 2005, the average home sold for about 150. Today it's double that price. And the problem is that the weekly pay for somebody who is for a 30-something has actually fallen from 2005 to today. So whilst house prices have been going up, the wage packets of larger younger people haven't kept pace with inflation. At the same time, we haven't been building enough new homes, and everybody is aware of just how few homes have been built across the country. But also we haven't been building the right homes across the right tenures. So lack of supply of new housing obviously increases prices over time. But we've also sold off a lot of the social housing that we had to help poorer people. And that has been done via something called Right to Buy, where people were able to buy their council homes. Those homes have not been replaced on a like-for-like basis. We've then had the financialisation of the housing market through the 1990s and onwards. Now we've got a new sector of landlords who have been set up in competition with young buyers. So younger generations have increasingly been unable to buy or to rent. Rents have increased at record amounts. I know, Mary, you're recording this podcast in Bristol, and I think I shocked you the other day when I said that rents in Bristol have gone up 60% over the period that we looked at this report. So in London, rents have gone up by 30% over the last 3 years alone. So younger people are having to pay much more in rent. Their wages have stagnated. They can't afford to save in many cases. They're falling back onto the family home. We've got 4.8 young adults actually living with mum and dad. We've also had tightening affordability criteria following the global financial crisis, so younger generations can borrow less. And then we've had a pandemic and older generations basically going on a spending spree, buying up more housing, second homes. And all of these kind of economic shocks have exacerbated the situation facing younger generations. So that's why we as an organisation see housing as a crucial issue for helping to improve the prospects of younger and future generations.
And as far as timing, this report came out before the general election. We're now after the general election, and also different pieces of policy that are coming out from the new government. So was that a factor in deciding to publish the report when you did?
It really was. I mean, the election caught us all on the hop, and actually Paul and the Land Planning and Development Federation had already agreed to support the research of this report. But of course, we had to pull it forward very, very quickly because we wanted to send a signal to MPs before the election that the housing crisis is local. It's on their patch, and we needed them to be the champions of new housing as we go into a new parliament.
This report was supported by the LPDF, the Land Planning and Development Federation. They are a body of land promoters. These are people working within the housing and planning industry. They identify and develop areas of land for new housing. Paul has been working in planning and land promotion for decades, so we've invited him to share some of his insights.
I'm Paul Brocklehurst. I'm chairman of the Land Planning and Development Federation, which I will shorten to the LPDF. Like a lot of things in planning, we always shorten them.
So how did we get to this point in the housing market where so many young people are unable to afford to buy a house, or trapped in private rentals and pushed into homelessness? How have we ended up not building enough homes for our population? Also, I was looking on the LPDF website, and you had this graphic that was about housing supply, and it showed that the stagnation happened around the late 1980s, and that the most dramatic drop was in the amount of local authority housing that was provided. Do you have any insight as to why that happened at that point in history?
I mean, often these things are to do with sort of funding effectively, and that was one of the reasons, although Liz has highlighted another, which is sort of the whole right to buy process.
Paul and Liz have both talked about right to buy. This is a piece of legislation that was passed in 1980. It allowed tenants of social housing the opportunity to buy the council house or flat they lived in off the local authority. This often came at a substantial discount. As of 2023, the maximum discount that you could get for buying your council property through right to buy was £116,000 in London and £87,000 for the rest of England. The scheme allowed many families the opportunity to own their own home and have a secure home for their family and generations to come. However, it also had the impact of massively reducing the amount of social housing that local authorities had. Once a flat or house was sold, local authorities were disincentivized from building more social homes because they could quickly be sold off with massive discounts, leaving local authorities at a financial loss. As a result, we have less social housing than we used to. Since 1980, an estimated 1.9 million homes have passed from the council to private hands. In 1980, there were more than 5 million social housing units owned by local authorities. In 2022, this had dropped to just 1.6 million.
The issue is that the proceeds weren't reinvested, and you didn't have like-for-like replacement into the what's called the social rented stock. What happened is we moved away from local authority housing. We developed a model based around housing associations, and there were huge stock transfers of local authority housing into the housing associations, and the funding model for those housing associations changed. Basically, they did not get the same level of investment as they did in previous decades. So we have seen a situation where a lot of, something like 50% of all affordable housing as it's officially defined is delivered through what is called Section 106. And this is where it all gets sort of geeky and technical.
We're going wonky.
A wonk, I recently learned, is someone who is enthusiastic about political policy. In planning, things can get wonky pretty quickly. So let's stop and explain what Paul means by Section 106. When a house builder is seeking planning permission, they enter into an agreement with the local authority. This is about the things they need to do to balance the impact of the new homes they are building on the local community. This is called a Section 106 agreement. This can be things like green spaces, providing local infrastructure, but this can also mean they have to build a portion of, quote, affordable housing. Liz will go into this later. The point Paul is making is that half of the affordable housing we build in the UK is built under these private agreements. Previously, a much larger percentage of this housing would be built directly by the local authority.
So that happens, and 50% now is delivered via that route. So you then get onto a question of, well, actually, is enough private development occurring that can deliver that, what is called Section 106? And my argument would be, no, there isn't enough.
And can I come in here, Paul? Because I think it's important to just lay out just how drastic the crisis is from an intergenerational perspective. So we had 1 million children that experienced destitution in 2022. 1.5 million children are currently living in non-decent homes. That's according to the English Housing Survey. Rural homelessness has gone up 18% over the last 3 years. And overall general homelessness has gone up 10% year on year between 2022 and 2023. So we've got nearly 90,000 children living in temporary accommodation out of about 250,000 people overall. So when we're talking about housing affordability, it's easy to think that housing associations are kind of the solution to dealing with affordability. But bear in mind that housing associations can charge 80% of market rates, which is pretty much unaffordable to many people in this country. And we have lost that element of social housing at the bottom of the housing market, which is what it is, therefore to protect and make sure that people have secure, affordable roofs over their heads. So the solution is that we've got to build more genuinely affordable social housing, and that's where our report came in.
The report looked at housing need by local authority in relation to the median age of the people living there. It found that local authorities with more young people had higher private rental costs. They also had higher rates of social housing sell-off, higher rates of homelessness, and higher rates of adult children living at home with their parents. Of the 30 local authorities with the most homelessness per 1,000 residents, 27 of those were below the median age. Overcrowding in renting and social housing has increased by over 50% since 1995. Meanwhile, for people who live in their own homes, under occupation, that's living in a larger home than necessary, has increased by 50% in the same period. Perhaps under occupation is a good place to start in finding solutions for the housing crisis.
What galls me is the fact that at the other end of the age spectrum, we've actually got a massive under-occupation crisis. We've actually got older people who are living in larger homes with more bedrooms who should be downsizing, moving on, and are making those houses available for younger people and young families to enjoy that space. So the question is, what do we do about that?
I think the point about under-occupation is a good one. Why are those people not incentivised to move on? Well, first of all, actually, stamp duty land tax is the most disincentivising tax. Basically, you have to pay a tax to move on every property purchase over, I think the level is about £250,000 at the moment. It disincentivises people to move out of their larger houses, which many of them would readily accept that they don't want. Then the next thing is, we all accept we've got an ageing population, and yet we don't build anywhere near enough specialist older persons accommodation. And so we need a much wider range of senior living choices for those people in larger houses to move into, and not necessarily feel that they're going to be taxed to actually do it as well, which is the whole stamp duty point.
Absolutely, yes, we understand. So from a policy perspective, you can understand why the stamp duty levy is a barrier to moving. But of course, to younger generations, it's really galling because they're watching older generations make this massive gain in housing. And then they're saying, let's give them another free ride.
I don't disagree with the comment, Liz, but I would say there's another way to pay that, basically.
Yeah.
Although Paul's suggestion of decreasing the stamp duty levy on moving home would potentially incentivise older people to move out of larger homes, this is not going to provide us with the amount of housing that we really need to shift this crisis. So how can we increase supply to get closer to the 300,000, now 370,000 target homes a year?
Well, I think there are so many issues when you talk about supply, and it is about supply. I think I'll address it in two ways. First of all, planning. We operate in what's called, or should operate in what's called, a plan-led system, and all local authorities should have what's called a local plan. And a local plan should talk about, well, in my view, a local plan should be the vision of the local authority led by locally elected councillors for the future of their area and the growth in both the economy, in the number of houses that are going to be delivered. But for a variety of reasons, very few local authorities have ever planned for enough housing. And secondly, on the latter point, which is build and how we build the number of homes. But we have a really bizarre model now for house building in this country, which is back in the 80s, 40% of our homes were delivered by small and medium-sized house builders. Yeah. Today, we're under 10%. So we will not build the homes that we want to build unless we change the structure of our housing industry. And so that isn't denying volume house builders opportunities, but it's increasing the opportunities for small and medium-sized house builders. And what that is also, a lot of that is planning led, but it is also ensuring that financial capital is attracted into the sector. It's also ensuring that we improve skills and have more potential workforce, and also improving the supply chain, because the supply chain has effectively it's got used to only having to build 200 plus ish thousands, give or take, 200,000 houses. So all of these things are going to require investment in over the coming period to get back up. And in addition, going to Liz's previous points, we need to build more affordable housing as well. So, and by affordable, I include social rent, as Liz has pointed out.
And from Liz, the intergenerational perspective.
Well, from this perspective, because we see housing as so crucial for younger generations, we have to be building up, we have to be building out, right? Do more high rise, building on brownfield sites, which are sites that have already been built on in towns and cities. We need to increase density. Younger generations want to be able to live near to transport hubs. But even if we do all of those things, we're still not going to be able to build the 300,000 homes that we need each year. So we need to be thinking about moving out. And then we have to have the conversation about the green belt. So as an organisation that exists to protect the rights of younger and future generations, there is an argument that we should be kind of protective in terms of environmental justice grounds and protect all areas of greenery. But we have to be pragmatic. And as we all know, the green belt isn't really green.
Liz is talking about the green belt. It's a term used to describe the area surrounding some towns and cities in England where building new developments is restricted. However, as a term, it comes with some confusion. This land, the green belt, is being preserved not because of its rich ecology, but because of where it sits on the map and how it helps control the size of cities. In fact, the majority of the land is in agricultural use, and some parts of it are already built on. Many people use the false idea of the green belt as an ecological designation to argue against housing developments, and this often comes at the expense of younger generations.
What we haven't talked about is the politics of it all. And by that I mean how houses get built in local areas. So when we're hearing about this idea of local plans that local authorities have to deliver, what is the power struggle going on within those local plans? And what's really interesting from an if perspective is watching discussion over the green belt being used by those decision makers in those local areas to, and we would argue that they're using their own age, wealth, and vested interest to prevent building and views being taken from their own homes, which is stopping the supply of new housing. I've got a very interesting case study in front of me here, and it's the district of Three Rivers. It's a really important site. It's just northwest of London, so it's great for young people, well connected, close to the railway line, and it just so happens that their local plan said that they needed to build 640 homes. Why is it that at a meeting, the councillors at Three Rivers decided that even though that they had a figure to deliver those homes, they decided that actually they were going to change their local plan and reduce it, that they only need to deliver 450 homes instead. So planning and politics and local politics and building is part of a pot that this new government is going to have to untangle, which is why we're delighted to see that in the new National Planning Policy Framework document, that the government is going to try to pin down local areas to deliver the new homes that they need.
On the 30th of July, the new government published their proposed reforms to the NPPF. Paul will explain what this means.
The National Planning Policy Framework are the central government guidelines for planning policy for England and Wales. Yeah. And basically what the government has done this week is amend that National Planning Policy Framework with the intent of delivering more homes.
The proposals that Labour are making are going some way to address the issues we have talked about today, increasing building targets nationally from 300,000 homes to 370,000 homes a year, and making these targets mandatory for local authorities. These are proposed changes currently in the consultation period, but they indicate a direction of travel towards building the homes that are so desperately needed.
So I just wanted to say, actually, I'm feeling really positive about the way forward. And I think there's loads of good news to be had. Number one, we as an organisation have helped to get the housing crisis at the centre of government by showing the plight of younger generations. We've got a new government that's intent on building new housing. They've actually already produced their new NPPF government, and they have said that they're going to increase the resources of planners. And, you know, I think that we can do this. It is going to be slow. We're not going to be able to deliver this overnight, but everybody, I think, from industry to think tanks to government, is pushing forwards. And I think families of parents and children and grandchildren are finally seeing that it's in their generational interest to push forward new housing for all generations.
And that's the end of this episode. Thank you for listening to What If. Thanks again to Paul Brocklehurst from the LPDF for joining us and also for supporting this report. You can read the report on the IF website, www.if.org.uk. We'd love to hear what you think. How do you think we can solve the housing crisis? We're on X @inter_gen. Thank you for listening.